Oh, right. So, this was one of the models that we asked you all to fix up. So I believe this one is, the wood texture was low resolution, and go. And we wanted the shape of the handle fixed. So I am going to look at what the original render looked like on our extranet. So these are the photos, reference image, and we have this nice, really close reference here. And so the files that we gave you to work on looked like this. So the wood texture is a little low resolution. It's a little blurry there. I think the shape of the handle is pretty close. It's not too far off. Just needs a little bit of editing. It's a little high, top to bottom here, but it's pretty close. So let's look at this one. So I definitely like the wood texture here. There's more detail and high resolution. It's actually so this one we can see is very high resolution, which is great. See a lot of detail zoomed in. So I think this was the original texture, and this is the one you guys worked on to make sharper. Is that correct? What? So you guys were fixing what we gave you. I think, was this the original that we gave you, and then this what you worked on? Okay.
Sorry,
It's okay. Don't worry. I will move on. Oh, so I think this was the original. So a few things to point out here. The texture looks nice and high resolution, but it's losing some of the distress, the grunge or wear from the supplier photo.
làm dịch nó chuẩn thế không? Được anh phiếu ạ.
So
Em thì rất chuẩn.
the resolution is sharp, which is good, but we would want to composite some other texture map to make sure we get some of these darker spots.
Dịch nó chuẩn. Em cứ tự tin lên. Tại vì em nhìn này nhìn nào đủ đi ạ. Cứ nói đi, cứ nói cho đi. Em cứ bình thường ạ. Hôm nay thời gian sẽ làm.
So I'm grabbing this from our material library just to get the grunge map from it.
Bạn thấy cái map bẩn nào về thực hiện không?
So it's this map that I want. And it looks like we already had this one in here. So I can close our material library there and go back to our main texture. And I'll add another bitmap with this one. This is our scratched, so that goes to the metal, not the wood. So basically, we could do something like make a darker version of our color.
Thì các bạn có thể tạo được một cái màu đậm hơn với cái màu mình đang sử dụng.
This thing takes a while to update sometimes. Too much. And I'll make a composite node where the our original bitmap will be my base, layer 1. And then I'll add second layer that will be the darker version.
Biên pháp đầu tiên thì bạn dùng là dưới đây là một và cái các bạn chỉnh xuống tối là có cái dưới đây.
And then I'll use this as the mask.
Và dùng cái texture này để làm cái mặt nạ cho cái mắt.
So we can see it's adding some of those darker spots. I think I need to invert this.
Khi mà mình thấy là đã có một số điểm nó đậm hơn rồi, tuy nhiên là trong cái thực tế của mình là mình sẽ cần là cái ngược lại vì nhiều cái sáng hơn cái đen nó ít đi, thì bạn invert cái mask này lại để mà tạo ra sự
So we can see it's mostly the original lighter version with some of the darker spots.
và kết quả là mình sẽ nhìn thấy gần như hầu hết là cái bản ban đầu, tuy nhiên là sau khi mask rồi thì mình sẽ thấy một vài điểm là có cái điểm đen lên.
So we can see that on our color here. So for the sake of demonstration, I'm going through this quickly. We might want to composite several different grunge maps. For now, I'll just use this one, but for the final version, we'd probably want to make sure it is closer to the shape of this, with a little more stripes. We might want several.
Đây là bạn ý thì cái technique thôi, còn thực tế để mà làm cái sản phẩm này cần phải mix nhiều cái quay, nhiều cái các loại với nhau để làm cái hình bản kia nó giống hơn.
So I'm rotating and stretching.
Bởi vì khi phân tích ở trong ảnh thì thấy là cái hình bản ở trong cái cũ nó hơi dài dài đấy. Nên là dựa cái map gốc bạn ý đã xoay nó và stretch, tức là kéo giãn nó ra để tạo ra cái độ nó hơn đó.
Just to make it a little bit closer. Not perfect, but we'll move on. And then when we're adding this kind of grunge, we want to make sure that it's the same in the different channels here.
Và sau khi mà mình đã tạo ra cái viết bản này rồi thì mình cần phải đảm bảo các cái quan track này là nó sẽ giống hết nhau trong các cái trình làm gì không chỉ cái này là cái mình quy đúng không? Mình phải đảm bảo là cái quan track đấy là nó cũng sẽ dùng được các bạn.
Any questions so far? Keep going? Okay. So looking at this close up, these dark parts, it looks like they stick up and they're rougher. So
Khi phân tích ảnh thì thấy là cái viết
in our reflect map, we want to composite this in also.
Lúc mà phân tích ảnh thì cái vết đen của mình là khi nhìn vào cái vết đen mặc dù là nó có đen nhưng mà nó còn hơi đôi trên kẹo.
So I'm gonna just shift click and drag to duplicate that node and put my reflect map in there instead. I'm waiting for it to update. There we go. I think the preview is wrong here. This stretching horizontal because of these. So it should, I'll try. Oh, you are right. No?
Because this is still horizontal, not the after you rotate it straight.
So I think the preview just doesn't update. So I think it's correct. I think it's just displaying wrong. We'll see. We'll test when we render. So we just want to invert. So I'll use the same for the mask here.
Thì cái bạn vừa nãy là bạn vừa nói là mình cần chú ý đến chính xác là mình vẫn dùng cái mask, cái mask cho cái run kia cho cái return.
And then if we're using a normal map in the bump node, we actually need to use the V-Ray normal map node, otherwise it does not work correctly.
Nếu mà mình muốn dùng cái normal mask vào trong cái bump mask của mình thì bắt buộc phải dùng cái V-Ray normal nó mới kết nối được, còn nếu như normal mask bình thường nó không thể.
So if I were to turn this up all the way, it does not quite look right.
Như là với cái cách mình đang làm thì nó một cách bình thường thì phải cho lên 100% rồi nó vẫn không.
It may not show in our preview here. There's one other thing we want to do with normal maps, which is, this is good, yes. Override to 1.0 for normal maps, that's correct. So I'll plug that in here, and then plug that in here. And I can turn this back down to where it was. So let's save this. And let's see this in our render QA scene. I figured out why it wasn't working last time. The bitmap was not connected correctly, so everything was black. So hopefully this will work now.
Bây giờ thì bạn mình sẽ cho cái sản phẩm này vào trong cái studio test để test. Buổi sáng này nó không lên là lúc bạn ngồi nhìn là do cái material chưa có nét hay là nó đen. Bây giờ bạn thử không, bạn không biết là mình sẽ tại sao để bạn đoán.
There. So I will double check that my HDRI file is connected correctly. We have it there, so we're good. I'll do it tiny to start with, and I can hit Shift F to see the size. Can push forward a little more. It thinks it's on my second monitor. There we go. Looks like it rendered the wrong view. There we go. So I'll do just that section and bigger. It's trying to hide zoom. So just to see how the light hits it at different angles, for testing purposes, I will rotate the object. So when we actually submit the skew, obviously, you want it to be facing the correct way, but this way we can kind of see how it looks with the light at different angles. So it's looking a lot brighter when it's facing the light straight on. So we can see this is based on the light angle because this part is darker and it's at a different angle here. So it looks like we have some light hitting this straight on. So I'm not going to worry about it too much because we know if the light's not hitting it straight on, it's not quite as blown out, but it's probably a little bit too bright. And it looks like here we can see that grunge is actually going the wrong direction. I'm not actually sure why the color correct doesn't detect the correct direction. I'm not going to try to troubleshoot it right now. So I'll just make this a little darker. I don't really need the grunge any darker, just the main reflect. So it's a little darker, which is better. But part of this is because we don't have a map in the gloss.
Phần nữa là do mình chưa có một cái map nào để điều chỉnh cái phần glossy.
So our gloss is just this value with no map. So we can do something similar to this for gloss, but we want the gloss to be higher. We can see this sort of polish there, this bright highlight here.
Có thể áp dụng cái tương tự để mà tạo cái độ bóng, bởi vì cái phân tích ở cái ảnh này trên bề mặt này và cái ảnh với trên chiều ngang giữa là cái độ bóng nó có rất là nhiều, vừa là mình chỉ cái độ ánh sáng và sáng lại, còn bây giờ chỉ cái độ bóng.
There's one thing I forgot. I'm gonna backtrack for a second. This has color in it, and I accidentally put that in the reflect. We want this to be grayscale without that brown in it. So I actually need to
Nhiều bạn cũng quên làm là phải cắm vào cái map đã có màu vào cái khu reflect, thì bây giờ là phải làm cho cái map nó reflect các màu.
to color correct just that and make it monochrome so that we're not adding color to our reflections.
Nên là cái khi mà ánh sáng phản xạ ra thì nó có cái màu.
So now it's gray instead of brown. So I can pretty much use this same thing for gloss, but I want it to be brighter.
Thì mình thấy là cái độ bóng của này nó bóng hơn, là cái phương pháp là tương tự nhưng mà mình sẽ dùng cái map nó sáng hơn.
And I want it to have lower contrast because this polish is pretty smooth. It doesn't have too much variation from the wood grain.
Và bạn bởi vì khi phân tích thấy là cái lúc đầu khi mình cái chiều bóng thì nó rất là mờ, nên là cần giảm contrast từ cái map thì kiểm soát vào cái gloss.
So it needs to be glossier than this. It's still too spread out and fuzzy. So that's better. And these dark spots you can probably leave. So we might have gone a little too far here. The contrast we're seeing here is maybe too much. So this is where could go in and maybe make this contrast even lower. So this number here is backwards. If we're in advanced, where it says gamma contrast, higher is actually less contrast, and lower is more contrast.
Khi mà vừa nãy làm mà rider thì thấy là cái contrast, cái độ tương phản nó đã hơi mạnh, nên là điều chỉnh trong khi mà mình áp dụng theo phương pháp này và khi mình chọn advanced thì thực tế là cái thông số gamma là nó là không dương, lúc đấy càng tăng gamma lên ở trong lúc mà chọn advanced thì là nó càng giảm độ contrast đi, và càng nhỏ thì nó lại là càng tăng contrast lên.
I don't want to do that. So for our gloss, this grunge is too noticeable. So I'm actually going to make a separate version of that composite and turn that down.
Vừa nãy ví dụ trực tiếp cái map cho vào reflection vì bởi vì nó đang khổ. Các cái vết bẩn nó đang hơi rõ quá nên là người ta làm cái nốt mới và giảm cái qua map.
So this probably needs a little more editing still, but I'm going to stop here just to move on. You get the idea of kind of how I adjust different values. Are there any questions on what I went through?
Nãy giờ là bạn chỉ cho mình các cái phương pháp để phân tích và các cái cách biết có thể chỉnh sửa cho nhiều rõ hơn các cái thông số để mình điều chỉnh. Thì mọi người còn có câu hỏi gì tiếp không?
Good. Okay. So one more thing on this one for the bump map. So we're using this normal map. If we want to make the grunge stick out like it looks like in the photo, where the darker part actually comes forward, we need to invert the map in the bump. So remember when we first grabbed this, actually we can take this one as our bump map. The white part will stick up and the black will not. In the V-Ray normal map node, we can also hook up a bump map here. So I'll plug this in, and I want it very subtle, not very bumpy, so maybe 0.1. So for actual production, we want to keep on adjusting values slightly. I'm going to move on for now. So there's a few others I wanted to touch on. So for this one, it's a sofa, and the instructions here were the proportion was off and it lacked wrinkles. Yes, that was an issue with this one, right? Yeah, I looked at the original and there was like 30 modifiers, really bad. Yes. This one was really extreme. It's not usually that bad. If you're fixing something that has edits on top of a smooth, like on top of a turbo smooth, we'll probably want to edit the version underneath and change the shape. The most common thing is there'll be FFD above Turbo Smooth, and if we need to edit things, we do it beneath the Turbo Smooth, and then we'll take the version beneath the smooth and change the shape and delete the FFD above. Does that make sense?
Yes,
Okay.
I understand. But just want to ask about the role of this team because if we need to like everything from the start, I don't think it will be fix support.
Right. So if it's something that has to be done all over, then just, don't do it, then tell us. Because the point is to take things that are partially done and finish them, not to completely redo. So if it's something that you need to redo, then don't do it and let us know. Yeah.
Thì để anh gọi là rõ ràng mình là fix thì không thể nào là lại cái đầu cả. Thì bạn bảo là cái trường hợp này đúng là nó hơi đã phải quá thật bởi vì đầu cái stack kia một đống không thể sửa được. Thì sau này nếu gặp trường hợp phải làm lại thì gửi trả không nên lại gửi trả.
So this one was very difficult. There were many modifiers. So for this one, I really like that you guys are using that technique that we put in, which one was it? Yeah, in here. So this is really useful where you use a displacement map and use the V-Ray distance text node, or I guess you have it in the bump here. So that's great. Just one thing I wanted to point out is, so this is good for creating wrinkles, but if we compare it to the photo, it's so the wrinkles are a little too uniform on here. They're kind of the same size and shape. So what I would advise here is composite a few different noises with different settings to break up the wrinkles some, and you can use a mask so that there's space between them and it's not the entire thing. So at the base level for the bump, I'll make a V-Ray color and set it to 128, like mid gray. I can't remember which order I need to put these in for the gamma to work correctly. I think I need to do it this way. And then I would duplicate this. And make them bigger. So I have this and this, and then I'll have this as one layer, but I'll have a mask so that it's not all there. I'll just use this dirt again. It's not perfect for this, but just to go through fast. And again, I'll invert it. So that it's only showing through a little bit where the white spots are. And that will be the mask for layer 2. So it's mostly gray with just a little bit of wrinkles. And I don't want the difference between the wrinkles and the non-wrinkled part to be so sharp. So I will blur the bitmap. And I want to see more areas of the wrinkles, so I will make this map bigger. So right now it's set to real world scale at 1 inch. I'll make it much bigger, maybe 10 inches. So I'm kind of just guessing here. And then I'll also add these larger wrinkles instead of the smaller ones. To our third layer. And I'll use the same map as the mask, but actually, let's see here. I'll duplicate that bitmap node and I'll offset it. Maybe mirror it in one direction. So I just want it to not be identical. Maybe I'll tile it a different amount. And forgot to invert that map also. And then we will connect that one here. So I didn't quite check how all of these are being applied to the SKU. I think I plugged that in right. I'll render and see if that was the right place. But I didn't go through every single node in there. But basically the idea was to put more variety in the wrinkles. So just for the sake of simplicity, so that I don't have to pick apart the complicated graph, I'm just gonna hook this up to the bump here. And composite it with the main pattern. Oh, that's right. Okay, so I think it's not going to let me hook up the distance texture to the bump. Okay. So I don't have time to get into it more right now, but the main idea is to basically composite these at different sizes in the pattern that's being used, so that it's less uniform. So I can work on this more myself and show you guys the end result. But that was the main idea I wanted to show. All right, so I can send out some more information on some of the other model fixes. Do you guys have any last questions on what I showed just now? Good. All right, thank you so much, you guys. Mm-hmm. Have a good night. Yeah, I'll go through some more the other day. I wanted to go through these more in detail, but I'll also give you guys information on the other SKUs.